Joo Hyung, the director, was reflecting on the origin of the incident that dated back some time. Song, the protagonist, closed his presentation with a determined tone, leaving everyone in the room in silence. The employees murmured among themselves, commenting that they had heard Song had another case on his hands, noting that everything he touched turned to success. A girl from the team added that he had even secured the position of leader in this new project, suggesting that the team must have had a hard time this time, alluding to Song's sharp personality. A boy, with a sarcastic smile, commented that with the wind blowing like a sword, it was no wonder he was going to become the swordsman of Yeoljiro. The girl, recalling her experience, responded that Jin Young must have suffered more since they had been on the same team. Upon hearing this, the boy laughed and said no, that leader Song had done all the work. Song, the team leader, sat in his chair and thought that, fortunately, the project had also been completed well. However, he was worried that if he paid this month, his savings would expire. He had laid some groundwork. At that moment, an assistant entered the office, calling him by name. Song turned around and asked what was going on, to which the assistant, Kim Jin-young, told him that he wanted to know if he would like to have dinner with them that night. Director Joo would be coming for the first time in a long while, and he thought it would be a good idea for Song to attend as well. In his mind, Song reflected on Director Joo Hyunmo, an attractive, tall man who could get his way in any situation. But he was also a cold-hearted person who could belittle others. Despite that, he was his role model. His sharp and authoritative personality kept him distant, but it seemed he was never truly alone. Finally, Song replied that it was fine, that he would attend that night, and asked where they would be going. Jin Young expressed his gratitude and promised to send the location via messenger. As he looked out the window, Song wondered if he could at least talk to the director at the table. Later, during dinner, a toast resonated in the room, celebrating Taewon. An employee, a bit drunk, shouted looking for team leader Song, congratulating him loudly. Another employee joined in, claiming that Song was truly impressive and that he could take him anywhere, but he would never give him up. Song, feeling that everything was getting out of control, thought that he shouldn't be there, that he should be talking to the director, and wondered where he was. A few hours passed, and feeling dizzy, Song sought to talk to Director Joo Hyun. A colleague, surprised by Song's state, said that someone should take care of him. Suddenly, someone offered to take charge. It was none other than Director Joo Hyun, approaching with a wicked look, taking the dizzy Song to a room. Once there, the director told him that he would make sure he wouldn't forget that night and that he wouldn't let him go. And well, you know what happened between them. First, the director took advantage of the drunk protagonist to have his way with the team leader's body. The next day, Song fled the place, questioning in his mind what had happened. In the office, the employees were murmuring about him, wondering what was wrong with him. They found out that he had lost his phone that morning, wondering if that was the reason. In his mind, Song comforted himself by thinking that at least he had found his cell phone. Then he complained about the pain in his back, remembering the reason for his discomfort. Just then, a guy named Park approached, asking him what was going on and if he had been around. He gave him a pat on the back and commented that he seemed quite drunk the night before, congratulating him for eating so well after so many years. Song thought to himself that it was the biggest glutton saying that. Song responded with a laugh, offering to bring him a coffee. Park declined the offer and, setting the coffee aside, pointed out that the selection process for the assignment to the UK this year had become more competitive than expected. Song nodded, remembering that they still had time before the test. Park continued explaining that although there was time, this time it was a bit unusual because it was rumored that people from the vice president's team were involved, and it was even being discussed on the company's anonymous message boards. Song reaffirmed that performance scores were his top priority and that he would do whatever it took. Park, acknowledging Song's amazing performance, warned him that there were things even he couldn't control. The higher-ups had the final say, suggesting that he keep that in mind. With a hand on Song's shoulder, he told him that it was enough to know that and to leave it at that, urging him to continue doing his good work. Song, reflecting, realized that this was a variable he hadn't considered. Just at that moment, an assistant appeared, calling team leader Song and announcing that Director Joo Hyunmo was looking for him. Song, surprised, repeated the director's name softly, wondering what he wanted. Song arrived at the director's office and knocked on the door. Director Joo's voice resonated, inviting him to enter. Upon doing so, Joo greeted him warmly, welcoming him. Song responded, but upon noticing the presence of several people in the office, his surprise was evident as he asked who those individuals were. Joo explained that they were lawyers from the Wadam law firm, pointing out that he thought an external lawyer would be more comfortable than a member of the company's legal team. In his mind, Song reflected on the firm that only dealt with large corporate litigation and wondered if the Chaebol were really initiating lawsuits over one-night stands. Joo invited him to sit down and make himself at home. However, Song's unease grew as he wondered why he had been summoned there with all those lawyers present. The director began by apologizing for being impatient that morning and assured Song that there was a procedure for everything. He then handed him a contract, expressing his desire to be with him like the night before. Song, feeling nervous, thanked him for the offer but declined. Joo insisted, questioning his refusal, while Song argued that it didn't seem right to accept. The director reminded him that it was a tempting offer and that he could satisfy all his whims. Song was surprised and asked what kind of whim he had in mind. Joo, with a smile, hinted that he was referring to the same whim from that morning. Song hurried to deny the implication, emphasizing that it was his choice, just as it had been Joo's choice. The director, in a sincere tone, revealed that it wasn't like that it was the only photo in the gallery on his phone. Song felt cornered, remembering that there had been a misunderstanding due to the phone switch at the restaurant. Joo, with a relaxed attitude, excused him and reiterated that he was more than happy to satisfy his tastes, even though Song might not want to. The director added that he couldn't imagine the benefits he could gain. Finally, Joo made him a concrete offer, promising to send him to England, where he so desperately wanted to go, but only if he signed the contract he had presented. After that intense meeting, Song arrived home and collapsed onto the sofa, feeling overwhelmed by everything that had happened. He reflected on the many things that had occurred, from the phone switch to the surprising contract relationship proposal. As he read the document, he couldn't help but be astonished by its contents. He wondered what the hell that offer of 300 million won meant, along with clauses about fulfilling wishes if the couple's ring was lost and a monthly checkup with a private doctor. He also noticed that if he broke the contract 3 times for his own reasons, there would be a penalty. With a mix of disbelief and frustration, he crumpled the contract and threw it in the trash. His thoughts echoed in his mind. Even if Joo was a Chaebol, there was no way they would send him to England for free. He felt determined not to be swayed by that extravagant offer. At that moment, the protagonist said he was going to sleep, and as he did, while he slept, he dreamed of the director. And well, it was one of those wet dreams. Wink wink. Upon waking up, Song reflected on the confusion he had experienced. As he went down the stairs, he saw the crumpled contract in the trash and thought that, in the end, it was just a matter of saying no. He realized that he hadn't thought about what that offer had implied until a week filled with dreams of the director had passed. When he arrived at the office, Song entered with determination and called for Director Joo. Joo greeted him with a smile, noticing Song's energy that morning. Firmly, Song informed him that he would accept the relationship contract offer. Joo smiled, considering it a wise decision, but Song clarified that he wanted to adjust some terms of the contract. Joo, curious, asked what those terms were that he wanted to negotiate. Song began to talk about the clause regarding living together, asking him to forget it. Joo, without hesitation, replied that it wasn't going to happen, but in return, he promised him more personal space than he currently had, offering him a penthouse just 3 minutes from the office. Song was not convinced, arguing that it wasn't the same as being at home. Joo insisted that he wouldn't invade his personal space without reason. The conversation continued, and Song expressed that 3 dates a week seemed excessive to him. Joo reminded him that it was a difficult commitment to make, based on the average number of dating days according to the Korean Business Association. Frustrated, Song mentioned how busy he was at work. Joo suggested that they could reassign tasks so that they wouldn't pile up on him, which only increased Song's frustration, as he thought Joo had no intention of coordinating. Finally, Song realized that there was no way to change the terms of the proposal, so he decided to propose some of his own conditions. He explained that these conditions would not interfere with his life and work. Additionally, He recalled what Joo had mentioned earlier about fulfilling all his whims, and added that intercourse should be mandatory at least 3 times a week. Wow, this protagonist is quite a character. I can't imagine how Anastasia will handle that after a month. XD. Song, with determination, stated that he couldn't negotiate on that aspect, and asked the director to let him know if he had any objections. Joo, with a smile, responded that everything was great and that he agreed, urging him to sign the contract. Song signed the document, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Just then, the director leaned close to his ear and whispered that he was actually more sincere than he believed. Song was stunned, wondering what he really meant. And damn, guys, this president really has a long fuse, wink wink, because at that moment, they both got to doing you-know-what, and the president wasn't lying when he said he would make him fulfill all his wishes. Wink wink. Exhausted, Song collapsed onto the sofa and couldn't believe he had signed that crazy contract. Director Joo entered and commented that Song must be thirsty. Feeling a bit overwhelmed, Song decided there was something he needed to tell him. Joo, with a look that suggested complicity, asked what it was about, and Song felt the situation becoming uncomfortable. Joo took his face and Song, confused, wondered what the hell was happening. The director reminded him that he hadn't accepted the clause about nicknames in the contract, suggesting that he think twice before signing something. Song, surprised, could barely process what was going on. Later, in the cafeteria, he heard his colleagues talking about Director Joo's success, how he had achieved impressive growth in the company and how, despite his cold appearance, he cared for his employees. Song felt uneasy, thinking that everyone was being deceived by Joo Hyun-mo. He remembered his persistence in offering him the contract and wondered if he really liked him more than he thought. Suddenly, Director Joo appeared and Song, astonished, asked how he had gotten there. Joo explained that he had gone out to get a coffee. Song, with a courteous gesture, congratulated him on the recent acquisition of Taewon Mobility, and Joo, with a smile, mentioned that it was always nice to be congratulated by his lover. Song, in his mind, wondered why he felt different now that they were face to face, sensing the tension in the air. As the director walked away to get his coffee, Song noticed Joo's phone on the table and felt intrigued. When Joo asked what was going on, Song hesitated, trying not to seem too curious. He decided it was time to look for loopholes in the contract now that he knew Joo's routine. Later, in the office, an assistant asked Song where he was going, as it would soon be time to leave. Song, smiling, told her he was going to a planning team meeting. The assistant looked at him in surprise, wondering if he was going to work overtime. Song smiled and, in his mind, thought that if he didn't, he might face the director's reaction. Just at that moment, Joo appeared and told him that he would take him with him, leading him to a private place. There, Joo asked him if it hadn't been difficult to hide without maintaining contact. Song, trying to avoid confrontation, asked if they could talk later, but Joo insisted that he wanted to hear an answer, not an excuse. Song looked at his phone and saw that there was 1 minute left until the meeting. He felt the pressure, annoyed by the director's audacity in interrupting him. The tension between them grew, and Song prepared to confront Joo once and for all. At that moment, the crazy director asked the protagonist if he would like to see him in his underwear in the middle of the subway, something the protagonist avoided answering as he left the place. As he walked away, Song reflected that, even if he thought about it, he wouldn't confess in the subway. He felt it was like paying a fine of 3 million wons and that was it. Suddenly, someone called his name. It was his boss, who apologized for being late, explaining that he was preparing the clothes he liked for his baby. At that moment, the boss almost pulled down his jeans, but Song, feeling uncomfortable, quickly led him away from that place, trying to avoid the embarrassing situation. At that moment, the boss took advantage of the fact that they were alone in that place, grabbing the protagonist, and getting handsy everywhere and making his rigor felt. Wink wink. The next day, the director greeted Song in a playful tone, asking if he had slept well and admitting that what happened the night before took him by surprise. Song, somewhat confused, couldn't help but question what kind of preparation the director needed. The director, unashamed, commented that although he enjoyed the previous night, he was still shy. Song thought the director's excuse about an anniversary celebration was strange and wondered what that celebration really meant. The director explained that Tax Day was a national commemoration and that they celebrated the anniversary according to the contract. Song, with sarcasm, suggested that maybe the director would also celebrate World Dog Day. The director surprisingly responded that they could extend the contract and get married in 3 years. Song felt frustrated and demanded to change the contract. The director, with a smile, stated that he didn't believe it, which led Song to make a tender expression while requesting to review the contract. The director, conceding, agreed to modify the definition of anniversary as long as Song moved in the next day because he didn't want to be apart from him. Later, in the office, after a long day, Song said goodbye to a colleague, thinking about how the negotiations with the director had been successful. They had agreed that they would only celebrate the anniversary on White Day and that they would also celebrate the 50th, 100th, and 150th days since they started their contractual relationship. As he headed to his new home, he reflected on moving in with Joo Hyunimo and whether he could do it well. Upon arriving, Song checked his phone and saw a message from the director asking why he had set his birthday as the password again. When he opened the door, he found the director waiting for him inside. The director asked if he wanted to shower first or have dinner, and Song, feeling somewhat uncomfortable, replied that not everything was as the director thought. As he looked around the penthouse, Song was surprised by how impressive the place was. The director encouraged him to wash his hands and eat. When Song saw the table full of food, he was astonished and asked what it was all about. The director smiled, explaining that he had prepared a special dinner for their first day living together. Although Song felt embarrassed and insisted that he could eat alone, once he tasted the food, he couldn't help but ask for more. Later, in his room, Song felt exhausted but pleased with the comfort of the place. While enjoying the atmosphere, the director appeared again, offering him dessert and suggesting that they start discussing their dating plans. He turned on a projector and presented a meticulously planned list of outdoor activities. Song felt overwhelmed and asked where he had come up with those ideas. The director assured him that he could trust his data, as it came from a report by the Korean Dating Association. Resigned, Song decided to trust the director, but he couldn't help but question how he could be happy with him after all that had been planned. When the director asked if he wasn't excited, Song, feeling caught between frustration and laughter, asked him to step back, although deep down he knew he couldn't resist the director's charm. The next day at the company, Song addressed the employees, thanking them for their efforts. The employees responded by wishing him to enjoy his lunch. Then, a colleague approached and asked if he was going to have lunch separately. Song, a bit distracted, explained that he had a packed lunch that he had brought. As he looked at his food, his mind wandered, wondering if he was hiding a ring or something similar, thinking that if he accidentally swallowed it, he would be married. Just at that moment, his phone rang. Looking at it, he saw that it was Cha Ji-hee, who complained about him taking so long to answer. Song reminded her that she was busy with her boyfriend, to which she confessed that she had broken up with him. Song, surprised, murmured that it was the second time. Then, Ji-hee asked what he was doing, insinuating that having a relationship with a boss was a sign of good luck for a top employee. Song, somewhat nervous, replied that he had stopped dating his boss and wanted to stop seeing him. Ji-hee, without hesitation, advised him to break up. Song, worried about being the first to ask for the breakup, couldn't accept that idea. Ji-hee insisted, pointing out that he wasn't someone who got tired of asking for money. At that moment, Song had a revelation and, laughing, thanked Ji-hee for her advice. Thus began Song-il's fierce battle. He decided not to clean his dishes or be tidy, leaving tissues and dirty clothes scattered everywhere. Meanwhile, the director approached with a smile and commented on the fruity smell emanating from Song's clothes. Song, confused, reflected on why he felt like he was the one being hurt in the situation. The director, in a loving tone, suggested going out on a date, asking how the weather was. Song, hesitating, became interested in the destination of the date, but the director interrupted him, exclaiming that they should go to a computer room. Song felt even more confused, wondering if he was really asking him to choose the place for the date. He was referring to the internet cafes or computer rooms that are popular in South Korea. After that, the protagonist and the director decided to go to an internet cafe. Upon entering, Song commented that he felt at home, reminiscing about his days in high school and preparatory school. He asked the director if he knew Mutacraft, revealing that he was a ranker in that game. The director, curious, asked what they were going to do that day. Song suggested that they each play a game. As he thought about his plan, Song focused on how he was going to completely neglect the director. Looking for the PC room, he mentioned that it was a place where games were more important than relationships, describing it as a couple's safari, where only instinct and disappointment existed. The director, intrigued, asked if that was the game Song had been playing since he was a child, calling him baby. While enjoying a game, Song couldn't help but think about Joo Hyunemo and whether he was still angry with him, wondering if he really cared about what he did. Suddenly, someone interrupted his thoughts. An employee from the cafe approached, apologizing and asking if he was the customer who had ordered 10 plates of jappagetti and everything else. Jappagetti, noodles with black bean sauce japang. Its name comes from the mix of japang and spaghetti, so it has thicker noodles. The protagonist replied that it wasn't him, while the director raised his hand and assured that he had asked to be taken to that place. The protagonist realized that it was the director who had placed the order, asking what it was all about. The director explained that he had done it thinking about what the baby would like, pointing out the variety of food. The protagonist insisted that the quantity didn't matter, but if they ordered again, he wondered what they would do and mentioned the high cost of the food. The director showed his card, asking if he was worried about his wallet. The protagonist denied that, feeling the murderous intent of the cafe employee. He then told the director that since he had ordered it, he should eat it. The director seemed satisfied, saying that they even prepared the food for him and that he would enjoy eating it. In his mind, the protagonist calculated that if they did things right, they would get 300 million for early termination. The director called him baby, asking if he was listening. The protagonist, somewhat distracted, replied that he was. The director, showing the food with his fork, told him to take a bite, claiming that it seemed like something a baby would love. The protagonist was alarmed, asking for a moment, and warning that it was spilling. As he thought about how this person always got carried away with everything, the director lost his online game, exclaiming that he was going crazy and blaming the protagonist for the defeat. The protagonist responded that he was the one who should take responsibility. The director looked confused, saying that from now on he would be in charge of the baby's life. The protagonist, annoyed, complained that this wasn't what he wanted, asking him to let go of his hand. The director, ignoring his discomfort, showed a shiny ring and claimed that he would be in charge of everything from life to games. Feeling the stares of everyone in the internet cafe, the protagonist shouted that it wasn't like that and begged him not to insist. The manager of the place yelled at them to either make a scene or leave. The protagonist, confused, asked what they would do now. The director, in a serious tone, explained that it was the weekend and they couldn't register the marriage immediately, suggesting that he accept the ring first. The protagonist, surprised, protested why he was talking about a ring after they had discussed that topic, asserting that he wasn't someone who would be swayed by words and that his relationship with the director was purely contractual. The director looked at him sadly, and the protagonist told him that he couldn't look at him like that. The director, in a resigned tone, suggested that if he felt that way, there was nothing he could do, but he asked him to keep the ring. The protagonist questioned what would happen if he didn't accept it. The director informed him that it would be a breach of contract, which made the protagonist, somewhat annoyed, ask him to give it to him. The director placed the ring in his hand, and the protagonist wondered if he was doing the right thing. Later, the protagonist sat worried, thinking that he was getting tired and that this was his last project, which concerned him even more. He questioned why no one seemed to hate Joo Hyunemo, even if they ignored his constant interruptions or the mess in the room. He reflected on the complexity of the situation and wondered what he should do. At that moment, a man approached and asked if he wasn't going to have lunch. The protagonist replied that he had a packed lunch that he had brought. The man, with sarcasm, asked if he was the one packing his lunch or if his girlfriend was doing it for him, noticing how white his face had become lately. The girl Kong, who was nearby, added that the team leader's face had brightened. The protagonist, a bit annoyed, mentioned that he generally thought they would change him, but lately he had become more flexible. The man asked if they wanted to go to lunch. The protagonist wondered in his mind if he really looked good, remembering how hard he had worked to get Joo Hyunemo to move in. As they were returning home, the protagonist looked at the director, reflecting on whether anything had changed since he started living with him. He knew there was a lot of anger in his heart, but he couldn't help but feel curious about his emotional state. The director, breaking the silence, told him that he wanted to eat something that his baby would prepare for dinner that night. He asked for some ramen. The protagonist found himself in his kitchen, with a mix of disbelief and disdain on his face, as he addressed the director. He knew that what was happening was nothing more than another one of those crazies driven by something strange he had seen on the internet. The director, however, remained calm, claiming that he just wanted to ask him to cook ramen. The protagonist's reaction was immediate. The flush on his face betrayed the discomfort he felt at such an unusual request. The director, in a teasing tone, commented on how expected it was for him to blush, referencing his nickname Baby. But the protagonist, defending his pride, replied that he didn't care what the director thought about his decision to make ramen, although he eventually gave in to the idea of considering it. Once at home, the protagonist reflected on his situation. He didn't want to cook ramen, even though thanks to Joo Hyunemo, he had managed to eat 3 times a day. He thought that maybe, if he changed to another dish, he could avoid the disaster that awaited him. When he finally presented his strange culinary creation, the director, upon tasting it, exclaimed that it was delicious. The protagonist, surprised, questioned whether everything he had endured so far would go to waste with that one meal. He mentioned his 300 million won and his business trip to the UK, urging the director to be grateful to him. Meanwhile, the director was interested in how things were going in the kitchen, but the protagonist couldn't help but ask him why he was wearing an apron. The director, with a mischievous smile, explained that since his hands were free, he would do something to please the baby's eyes. He even suggested buying another kitchen apron if that would make him happy. The protagonist, in a resigned tone, told him that he didn't care what he was wearing. He just wanted him to focus on the food. Then, upon opening the fridge, he found a piece of meat and was surprised to realize its high cost. Without thinking twice, he decided to use it. The director, excited by the idea, suggested that they should also get some king crab. The protagonist, convinced, nodded and prepared for the culinary challenge ahead. As Sung got ready for dinner, the director approached playfully and called him baby. Sung, surprised and somewhat irritated, asked what he was doing there. The director mentioned that he thought it was romantic to participate in the cooking, but Sung quickly dismissed it, assuring him that he hadn't planned for that and that he was just getting in the way. At that moment, the kitchen splattered oil, causing Sung, startled, to jump into the director's arms. In a pleading tone, he asked him to put him down, while at the same time noticing that the director's arm was red from the oil that had splattered. The director explained that it was just a small burn, and Sung, concerned, promised to give him some medication after he ate. The director, with a touch of humor, asked to be treated in a way that wouldn't hurt him. Meanwhile, Sung focused on the ramen that was already ready, assuring the director that he could rest with an ice pack on his arm. After serving the food, Sung reflected on how he had been so distracted by the director that he had prepared everything almost out of habit. The director, with a smile, commented that it surely looked delicious, but he dared to ask if it was customary to add so much water to instant noodles. Sung explained that when he was young, he always cooked them that way, arguing that the more broth there was, the fuller you would be, and that you could also eat more rice. Then, with curiosity, he asked if the director had tried ramen before. The director laughed, confessing that he hadn't, but he remembered an occasion when someone had invited him to delicious ramen, and since then he had been eating a lot. Sung, intrigued, asked what kind of ramen it was. The director, with a sparkle in his eyes, revealed that it was the same one they were eating now. Sung, skeptical, challenged him, insisting that he was lying and asked if he had eaten it in a special place. The director replied that yes, he had enjoyed it by the sea during the winter. He added that instant noodles taste better when it's cold, which made Sung smile, sharing that little moment of connection as they sat down to enjoy dinner together. Well, after that, the director came up and whispered in the protagonist's ear that it was time for ice cream, and you know what I mean, and it's not just about going to eat ice cream, wink wink. Later, Cha Ji-hee sent a text message to the protagonist, announcing that she would bring him fresh pork belly at 7 and that the situation was very serious, mentioning that if he went, he wouldn't have to pay her back the 20,000 won she had lent him. A little while later, Cha Ji-hee met up with the protagonist and told him that as soon as she said he didn't have to pay her back, he had shown up. The protagonist, curious, asked what was going on with the serious situation. Cha Ji-hee, with a tone of frustration, told him that he had hung up on the conversation as if he had something more important to do. The protagonist defended himself, questioning why he had to explain. She, determined, assured him that today he was going to pay. In response, the protagonist began to detail his situation in an order that included counterpart, specifications, progress, and problems. Cha Ji-hee, not wasting any time, reminded him that he had slept with his boss after a dinner and that it had been a disaster. She also asked if he had mentioned that he was looking for a contractual relationship for 300 million to go to the UK. The protagonist nodded, explaining that the director was crazy, that he was chasing him, and that he wouldn't leave him alone even when he said he was tired of him. Cha Ji-hee, observing him, commented that he seemed very full, to which the protagonist exclaimed that he was hungry. Cha Ji-hee looked at him and reminded him that his boss had money, was attractive, had energy, and was solvent, questioning why he was underestimating him. The protagonist, surprised, replied that they barely knew each other and she was already suggesting that he marry him. Cha Ji-hee firmly told him that if it was the right thing for him, he should consider it. The protagonist, indignant, dared to question how she could say that. Cha Ji-hee continued, arguing that he had gained a significant benefit and that in everyone's eyes, it was a clear win. She asked him to think objectively and not to complain about his life in his penthouse, pointing out that he should ask himself why his boss was so in love with him. The protagonist, astonished, questioned what she was saying. Cha Ji-hee insisted that he tell her what had happened at the company dinner that made his boss work so hard for him, suggesting that she could help him decide whether he should put up a fight or not. She believed it was pure love. The protagonist, surprised, doubted the idea of pure love. Cha Ji-hee, not giving up, reminded him that he should think about what was best for him in the long run and that there was nothing wrong with having a relationship. Finally, Cha Ji-hee called the waitress, asking for 2 more bottles of beer, while the protagonist continued to reflect on what she had said, feeling the pressure to make a decision that could change his life. After a while, both of them left the place somewhat intoxicated. At one point, the protagonist couldn't hold it in and vomited a little. Just then, the director arrived, who became concerned upon seeing him in that state. The protagonist, trying to find some humor in the situation, asked why his clothes were so clean and nice. The director, in a worried tone, asked if he was feeling okay. However, the protagonist, with his head somewhat confused from the alcohol, decided to throw an unexpected question at him. He asked why the director liked him. The atmosphere became tense and curious as they both looked at each other, waiting for an answer that could change the dynamic between them.